Howdy everyone, and welcome back to my channel. For the first video that I did, we talked about logic bias towards Beyond the Map's Edge treasure hunt. The last video I did, we talked about what are some good questions to ask Justin Posey when we get a chance to ask him, such as a Seekers Summit. Which if you guys have not signed up to go to Seekers Summit yet at the end of March in Tucson, Arizona, I really encourage you to do so. MN Jam went live with Treasure Hunt with Us earlier this evening. Of course, Mysterious Writings has been really pumping this up, but it's going to be a pretty darn good event. I believe Friday evening there's kind of like a meet and greet or social aspect of it, and then Saturday is just filled to the gills, if you will, with sessions. A lot of different people. I just encourage you to go back and watch the live session recording from Treasure Hunt with Us earlier this evening. Get all the specific details you might find me in that session, in one of those sessions. I don't think my name was explicitly called out, but you could probably figure it out. But for this video, I wanted to do a little bit something different and look at a certain general area and maybe give out some videos and publish some videos where we're looking at specific areas that the treasure could or might be in and try to talk about them and see why that might apply. So with no further ado, I'm going to present my screen and we're going to look into the first area that I think is interesting, and I'll tell you why. So here we go. What I believe is an interesting spot is the Garden of the Gods area. And as you can see in the title, it's Justin Posey's treasure hiding near, not in, but near the Garden of the Gods. Why I say near and not in is there are a lot of leave no trace rules and guidelines in regard to this hunt. In regards to this hunt, if it were to be in Garden of the Gods, which is in Colorado. What brought me here was just a general logic and thought process about the 4/2 that we see in Netflix on his tail light. I personally believe it is intentionally 4/2. He definitely had enough room to write out 42 horizontally if he wanted to. I believe he chose not to. And so I started thinking about what 4/2 could be on his map, because he says the map is useful, and I have a few thoughts on that, but nothing really that great for the 4/2. So then I started thinking about states. So then the natural progression of that was, well, what state has 4? And then what state has 2? And what kind of landmarks or things caught on his map would fit there? So I looked at national parks, which are just prevalent on Justin's map. And interestingly enough, Colorado has 4 national parks on his map. Then right below that is New Mexico with 2 national parks. So I started looking into both those 2 states and their national parks included. That's what led me to Garden of the Gods. And we will get into whether or not it's a national park in a moment. This is not breaking news, the various Discords and Reddit, but it was kind of new to me the other day. I guess I must have missed that conversation months ago. But regardless, there is some compelling evidence, and I think we should discuss it and see what we think. Make a collective decision about whether or not Justin Posey's treasure could be in Colorado and in the general area near the Garden of the Gods. So I'm going to try to get into the habit of making these screens bigger when I discuss them and kind of like bringing myself back out and back on camera. So I'm going to be kind of in and out of camera. I'm going to try to get used to that so that you all can see the Google slide presentation more clearly. So as we see the video's agenda, why would it be near the Garden of the Gods? The first thing we're going to talk about is park entry and guidelines. The next item will be park type, designation, and information, which I hinted at a few minutes ago. Then we have a whole slide on rules on dogs. And then last but not least, I believe we have 2 slides on landmarks and wildlife. So we'll get into both of those and put out some interesting landmarks and wildlife types that I thought are very compelling and very intriguing. So the next slide is park entry and guidelines, as seen on the park's website, which I believe is just simply gardenofthegods.com. And it parallels a lot with Justin's Beyond the Map's Edge rules section. So we see here that the Garden of the Gods park is actually free to enter. The park is open 365 days a year. The various like park guidelines, if you will, We'll call out being careful with fire, respecting wildlife, plan ahead and prepare, which we all see on Justin's website as well for Treasure Hunt Quest. And park type designation and information. This is where it gets kind of intriguing. So Garden of the Gods in Colorado is a national natural landmark and not actually a national park as shown on Justin's map. I was kind of intrigued with that at first, but then someone reminded me in one of the Discords that there are some issues with the map, and if there's anything that pops up, it's not a clue. It's just mislabeled, misinterpreted, whatever you want to say. But either way, it is a national natural landmark, but it's still somewhat interesting because when he talks about Saguaro National Park and Saguaro National Monument, he says, what's the difference anyway? So you could imply the same aspect here in logic that national natural landmark and national park. What is the difference? I would encourage you to go look it up and figure out and make your own perceptions off of that. But it's cool stuff. So with that, Garden of the Gods is not a state park. Garden of the Gods is also not a national park. The park itself is owned and managed by the city of Colorado Springs, and when it was gifted or designated to the city by the Perkins family, they wanted a stipulation in there that the land must always remain free to the public as requested by the family. So that's something that if Justin was concerned about land rights and things kind of going away, he could have some cover in the fact that the family wanted it to be public lands for the rest of the time. You could even say possibly that this park's land status, at least as of now, would live in time as a public place. So who knows? Next slide here is rules on dogs. You see a Vesla, obviously for Tucker. Tucker, may your spirit live on, as we've all had, or a lot of us have had dogs and know the impacts that they can have on our lives. And obviously, Tucker had a massive impact on Justin's life, and we got to see him in Netflix. So, little nod to Tucker there. So the specifics: dogs are welcomed in the park. I believe there's like a 6-foot leash law or something, kind of standard for parks. But this one had some interesting aspects for sure, that dogs can also roam free in the designated off-leash area. AI calls it that. I believe it's more so a dog park, but it is actually labeled on maps, Google Maps, etc., as a designated off-leash area for dogs, which is interesting. Again, I really should come up with a different word for interesting. Maybe you all can help me with that in the comments. But in the book, Beyond the Map's Edge, Justin calls out Stinks Canyon, welcome Tucker's company, lying beyond national park borders where dogs could still roam free. This would apply here because, again, it is a national natural landmark, not a state park, not a national park, so it is free of national park borders, and Tucker could, in theory, roam free in certain areas of the park. Or your dog. The next two slides cover various landmarks and wildlife, and I kind of tie in some different things in the book, which is intriguing, not interesting, intriguing. First one is Balance Rock, which is shown here a little bit in this image in between the two circles. I didn't, for some reason, capture the full thing. It's pretty neat how it is standing or resting on this small little thing, and they've done some work to kind of keep it that way and ensure its safety so it doesn't fall. But it's a landmark, and it's a known landmark in Garden of the Gods. And I thought that was intriguing because Balance of the Rock in the section in the book where he says, this wasn't your garden variety boulder. No, this was a rock with delusions of grandeur, shaped like an arrow and pointing emphatically at, and I believe the rest of the hunt is, that's the $1 million question, which again, if you're a fan of Colorado, there's a $1 million highway, not here, but close. Well, if you want to call 5 hours close, but $1 million highway is a well-known highway in Colorado. The next landmark in the park for Garden of the Gods is Cathedral Spires. Justin says in Beyond the Map's Edge, I was a devotee in the cathedrals of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And I'm sure your first thought is, he didn't say Colorado, Wick, and I agree with you. He did not, but he does call out cathedrals and how much he was a devotee in them. And then you go look on the map. There's a ton of national parks on Justin's map. And in the initial days with Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir, I believe, they were initially called cathedrals. and later designated as national parks. And the next one is North Gateway Rock. We're all familiar with the line in the poem, as a bride stands guard at ancient gates. Three Sisters and Three Graces are two distinctively different landmarks. So you could potentially tie in the foot of three there. I believe I saw on Discord, I'm not sure with the name, but somebody was looking at Three Graces and the spires of the rock formation there and noticed that at the position he or she was looking at, that it was about a 20-degree direction of bearing, which is kind of cool. And last but not least, in the landmark section, Sentinel Rock. Sentinel or Sentinels is used in the book Beyond the Map's Edge 6 times. It's often said, I believe, Cottonwood stood sentinel, and sentinels kind of highlighted in the book as guarding or looking over something. So there's that. The next slide is about landmarks and wildlife. Garden of the Gods is home to, I think, like 100 or so Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. The area in general is a haven for over 15 types of wild birds. All birds are wild for the most part. But there actually are a lot of raccoons in this general area of Colorado, specifically in Garden of the Gods Park. I believe they are even called out as wildlife, which is not interesting. Compelling. We'll say compelling. Compelling because oftentimes raccoons just simply aren't called out as wildlife. They're just, like not protected wildlife, etc. But here in this park, they are. And if you go north of the Garden of the Gods area into like the Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is a beautiful site close to Denver, raccoons are talked about oftentimes just hanging out, people and pictured in various images of concert goers, and they're just kind of there hanging out. The last two types of wildlife frequent in this park are coyotes and, of course, rattlesnakes. So with all that there, I just thought that was a lot of cool connections. Again, Balanced Rock, Cathedral Spires, North Gateway Rock, Three Sisters and Three Graces, Sentinel Rock, and then the obvious wildlife mentioned and shown here. But the most interesting thing that I thought was the raccoons, because we don't really have a good answer, at least not me. I do not have a good idea or answer for raccoons. Last little slide is just a few facts here. Garden of the Gods was a neutral ground for Native Americans, for various tribes. This peaceful area was notated as being sacred. 5 different ecosystems converge at the Garden of the Gods. A little bit of a description for those are cottonwood willows, prairie grasslands, mountain shrubs, pinyon junipers, woodlands, and ponderosa pine forest. Again, pines are a common theme in the book. Cottonwood show up a lot. Prairie grassland, I could say a little bit. Obviously, mountain shrubs, anything about that. The woodlands, the woods, the wilderness, as he's mentioned in several recent videos, as being a possibly thematic aspect of his hunt. But those are the things I wanted to call out for, excuse me, for Garden of the Gods. Again, it is not technically open 24/7. I believe it's like kind of dawn till dusk, morning to evening type of thing. I believe the main reason for that is the rock climbing. They don't want people out there climbing, then doing all the cool rock climbing and the various rock formations that you can rock climb on in the dark. So they kind of manipulate the hours for that. I believe if it was not for that, then the park would indeed be open 24/7, would be free, would be accessible 365 days a year. But I encourage you to look at a lot of things when you're looking at parks or areas. One of the main things is the whole leave no trace park area or park designation, where you're not supposed to bring anything, pack in, pack out, leave nothing behind, don't take anything that you find, all those kind of things, unless Justin was a loophole virtuoso, as he says in doing, and really had some neat way to leave a treasure in the Garden of the Gods. I think it'd be rather difficult, and I would assume he would probably not do it. But you can make an argument at least about national parks if you want. I know in one of the collabs with One Clue Short of a Treasure, I believe the first video we did, I brought up either 9 Mile Hole or just Yellowstone in general, or maybe just someone had a general question about it. But there's Actually, like, why do people still think that Yellowstone's in play and national parks in play? You can't access those 24/7. They're often not free, etc. But I do think that when Justin says that he's wanting us to go into the general areas that he intended us to go to, just because he doesn't necessarily put a clue behind it or put a clue in that particular line in terms of an area or land designation, I still think he wants us to go and see these things. He wants us to get an overall appreciation and love and respect and a conservative effort towards our national and public lands. He wants us to go see Yellowstone. I think he wants us to go see the Madison River, Navajo specifically. He calls it out over and over in the book, and he says that Finn's hunt was a launching point for his, which of course is Navajo. So it's hard to argue or discern that Justin doesn't want us to go see these national parks and state parks and national conservation areas. So those are just some things that I would genuinely consider that everyone looks into when they're looking at an area. And then the last little funny tidbit, I found a way to also tie in 42 and 27 through confirmation bias, solely confirmation bias, but AI says the resort and club offers rooms with 42-inch TVs. There's your 42. Easy. And then there's a 27-hole championship golf course there. So there's your 27. So again, 42, 27, blue 42, raccoons, coyotes, rattlesnakes, birds, rock formations that are intriguing names based off things in the book. I mean, you just never know. These are the kind of things that I often go through an exercise of for an area or a park, and then kind of some of the things I look to make connections with. I don't know if they're right. They could be horribly wrong. But I thought it was a cool slide presentation. It made for a fun video. So thank you all for watching. Last but not least, if you haven't liked the video, please do so. If you're not a subscriber, but you've liked my content and want to see more of it, or if you got some ideas for me and want to encourage me to kind of give some ideas and comments, please do so, and please subscribe. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week.